Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Adams. I'm the editor-in-chief with the Knowledge Hook Signature Leadership Series and an executive committee member for Karanga. And I'm here to welcome all of you to our website series called Social Emotional Learning Global Leadership Series. You can see at the top of the page, we have 3 partners that have come together in this time of huge challenges worldwide. We know that many schools systems are closed. We know that lots of institutions are closed, and we know that the entire world is dealing with challenges on a health standpoint, of course, on a social standpoint, and as well as continuity of learning. So these 3 partners have come together to make sure that we can have the world in a better place. The first partner is the Signature Leadership Series from Knowledge Hook. And that organization is one that started a few months ago. Knowledge Hook itself is a digital math company, and they approached me to set up a series for senior education leaders, K-12, but beyond. And we decided that we would base it on 3 different topic areas. Education 2030, providing senior education leaders with an opportunity to see what's going on in education systems around the world. Second topic being future skills, an opportunity for senior leaders to hear what's happening with employers and what are the kinds of skills that they would like us helping our students and learners develop. And finally, improving math achievement, understanding full well that superintendents and ministry people aren't always responsible for actually implementing the district-wide plans, but that they're very important in monitoring, resourcing, and communicating what's happening in mathematics in their districts. We have 3 partners. This was the first one. The second partner in this series is Salzburg Global Seminar. And Salzburg Global Seminar is an international nonprofit that has been up and running since the end of the Second World War in 1947. It's a huge network with 36,000 fellows from 180 countries around the world. Their mission is to challenge current and future leaders to shape a better world. And how important is that at this point in time? In 2015, they began a series of sessions on social emotional learning, and it really gained such momentum that it culminated in March 2019, so exactly a year ago now, with the Salzburg Statement on SEL. And certainly, you know, anyone that's watching right now, certainly go on and you can have a look at what that statement is. Our third partner is Karanga. And Karanga is a global alliance for social emotional learning and life skills. And it's exactly 1 year old. Our mission is to support learners to develop the skills needed to thrive in schools, in work, and in life. And you can see the work that we're doing there. And again, encourage people that are on right now to click in and take a look at the work that they're doing. It is my pleasure to introduce the host for today, but just before I'll do that, I'll just give you a sense of who's on with us today. We have participants from 7 Canadian provinces, from 27 states across the United States of America, and from 20 different countries. And it's really fun to see that leaders are coming together and learning from each other and from the great panelists that we have today. We've got a huge contingent from New Zealand and a really big contingent from India, and lots of representation from the other 18 countries. So welcome to everybody, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to our host, who is Joanne McEachen. And Joanne is originally from New Zealand, but she's been in Seattle, Washington for the last 10 years or so. She is the CEO for an organization, a company called The Learner First. And she is also an executive committee member at Karanga. Joanne, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Jen. Kia ora koutou, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you today. It's often in these most challenging times that we slow down and think about what matters most. As senior leaders face the challenge of a global health crisis, we were presented with the opportunity to deeply consider what we really want for our kids and what we want for the world, and education's role in making both a reality. As leaders, we may be struggling for a myriad of reasons. We could be feeling slightly disconnected. We could be helpless to contribute, while others might be feeling slightly unknowledgeable about the current situation or lost and uncertain of purpose and direction. These feelings can be amplified in times of great crisis, but at the same time, they're the feelings that prevent human beings from that feeling of health and well-being at any stage of our lives. This webinar is an opportunity to examine the feelings and our own well-being as system leaders so that schools are able to find value in the outcomes that matter to make us all human and feel valuable at any time of our lives. And these outcomes are self-understanding, knowledge, competency, and that very sense of connection that we're all really trying to find at the moment. We find ourselves in really quite a precarious situation as leaders at the moment, especially as educational leaders. We're kind of trying to balance our own well-being and the well-being of our communities, the well-being of our friends and family, and the well-being of ourselves. But we're also trying to lead ourselves into a better future, into the world that we really want. And those are some of the conversations that I'm finding that I'm having with some of my friends and colleagues at the moment. So for this 1 hour webinar, we've asked our global thought leaders, Dr. Mark Brackett and Dr. Jean Clinton, to share their thoughts on the following 3 questions. What is well-being, and why does it matter so much for us in the learning at the moment? And what can we as senior leaders do for our own well-being and those for our communities and those for people around us at the moment? And how can we ensure when this crisis is over that we don't just go back to the same way of being and the same way of operating? So without waiting for any further time, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Jean Clinton, a really good friend and colleague of mine. Dr. Jean Clinton is a clinical professor at McMaster University. She's from the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioural Neurosciences. She's been working with me for many years through several contracts that I've been working on, and she's renowned nationally and internationally as an advocate for children's issues. Her special interest lies in brain development and the crucial role relationships and connectedness play therein. Jean champions the development of a national and comprehensive child wellbeing strategy, including a system of early learning and care for all young children and their families. She's equally committed to ensuring that children's and youth's needs and voices are heard and respected. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Jean Clinton, a wonderful woman and more than anything, a wonderful human being. So welcome, Jean.
Absolutely. So I'm needing to apply all of Mark's ruler, trying to contain myself here with excitement. Yeah, so I'm really thrilled to be invited to speak to you today. I'm a child psychiatrist, an infant, child and adolescent psychiatrist, and as you can hear, I'm a Scottish Canadian child psychiatrist, so I want you all to check your confirmatory bias, and by the end of this you'll all agree that you love Scottish child psychiatrists from Ontario, Canada. Why do I do that? Because when I want to open to speak to people, I want to immediately try and make a connection that is significant, that is humorous, that can open the brain to making that connection. So as I speak to you for the next 15 or so minutes, I'll be the first question to be addressed is, what is well-being and why does it matter so much for learning? So in the next slide, realizing his or her own potential can cope with the normal stresses of life. And we'll hear more about this both from myself and from Mark. And as we think about what are the characteristics and the competencies that young people need and that we need as leaders, we also need to be able to think of these things and be productive and fruitful as well as make a contribution to your own community. So what's key for me as a medical professional is to realize that well-being is more than the absence of illness. It's about flourishing. We in Canada have been very much connecting with our Indigenous community, our First Nations people here in Canada. And on the next slide, you see that the well-being through an Indigenous lens is all about having balance, having a balance of the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional self. So that means having a sense of purpose. Why am I here? So for me, I have a huge desire to reach out to people, to send a message of you're not alone. We're all in this together. So my purpose is very much about trying to make a difference in the lives of people that I can. We need to have hope for our future, which is so key at this point in time. We also need a sense of belonging and meaning. As we think about our well-being these days, when we think about meaning in our daily lives, it's really thinking about what are our needs, our values, our goals and our strengths, as my friend Stephen de Groot from Brivia Consulting talks about. These are our core four. And I think at this point in time, we do have the opportunity to stop and say, what brings meaning to me? Because in our relationship and in our environments, we can absolutely make change and make a difference to this. So I've been listening a lot to Bruce Perry. So thinking about well-being, we need to be thinking about two key elements, and that is how stress affects learning and well-being, and how emotion has an impact on all that we do in terms of learning. We'll be hearing much, much more about this from Mark. So if you look at this resource here, and that's one of the things I want to share with you, is a number of resources. You see that Bruce Perry is talking about the most powerful buffer in times of stress and distress is our social connectedness. So let's all remember to stay physically distant, but emotionally close. Reach out and connect. Even, you know, just a short text or a smiling face makes a difference. Why is that? On the next slide, what we see is that the rational brain is deeply affected by the limbic system, the emotional brain. And to put it overly simplistically, if our limbic system, if our emotional brain is in the driver's seat, then our rational, our thinking, our planning, organizing brain is not as effective. So uncertainty makes your brain yield control to this more emotional system. And so what I'll talk about in a few minutes is how crucially important it is then that we are addressing how can we make our limbic system feel safer. Can we create predictability? Can we moderate and bring down some of the stressors by creating a predictable exercise, all kinds of other things in life that I will talk to you about. The other way that well-being is connected to learning is through our emotion. You know, old Descartes, some of you may be Monty Python fans and know the old Descartes rhyme in Monty Python, but he said, I think, therefore I am. And what Mary Helen Imordino Yang is really discovering, along with other leaders like Mark, is that emotion is hugely important. We don't learn anything that is of significance until there's an emotional connection with it. So we have to change it, that I think, therefore I am, to I feel, therefore I learn. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is what can we do during this time for our own well-being? And again, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but what we can do for ourselves and for our families is very similar. And as I think of you as leaders, I think about how are you in a position to give messages that says, first of all, stress is on its own is not bad. We need stress to get pumped up to do a webinar like this, along with the famous Mark Brackett, for goodness sake, and Joanne, all these famous people. But so we need that level of stress. What is really important though, is what is your pattern of stress? Can you create a system in your day-to-day living and in your leadership that creates the uncertainty into certainty? So what we know is that when stress is managed through predictable activities that's listed here, and I'll talk about again, if you manage it to be moderate and more controllable, it leads to resilience and to tolerance. But on the next slide, what we see is that when you don't have that, when you are not putting structure in place and comfort eating and you're watching the media all the time, it becomes chaotic. And that severe, prolonged, uncontrollable stress leads to vulnerability and sensitization. So we have to know that stress is really important to build resilience, but it is a pattern. And so if you as a leader can think about how do I shift the pattern so that I can help those that I'm leading have more predictability. So here are some very practical strategies in the next slide that will tell us how to do this. So first of all, again, I want to share the resources with you. So the learningformentalhealth.com is from the National Health Service with some wonderful ideas. But there's also a great article in Psychology Today just out that you can look up. But here are 8 things that you can do as a leader to help those that you are working with, as well as personally. And they're based on the neuroscience and what we know about stress and trauma. And that is, it's so important. The brain likes predictability. It's so important that we create daily routines, that we get good enough sleep. Now, this is funny, I put a picture of a baby in here, but I know with being a grandma and a mother of 5, that you don't want to sleep like a baby because they wake up every 2 frickin' hours. You want to sleep better than that. You need exercise. You also need to lend your calm. But what we're finding, as I talk to many people, is many people don't have what Mark has been professing for so long. And that is a place to recognize their emotion and have that sense of calm. Know where their calm is. Where's your safe place? Where's your happy place? Now is the time to really explore that. We know that family meals and connections make a huge, huge difference. So what the neuroscience also says of compassion and reaching out is, you're not on this earth to walk alone. Reach out to others, help others. That makes a big, big difference. In, we can talk about the neurotransmitter oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, the connecting hormone, but reaching out to others and not remaining isolated is so important. Then we've got limit media time. You know, it's especially important for kids to not have that television on in the background, because, you know, the news series rotates every 8 minutes. Well, they may not realize that, and they think, oh my God, I heard about how bad it is in New York or wherever, and it's coming closer. And then they hear it again in 8 minutes and they think it's worse. So for our kids' sake, but also for our own sake, modify and monitor that, that exposure. So always remember, your focus determines your reality. So here in the next slide, I want to ask you to think about the following. This again is from my, my good friend, Stephen de Groot. What we know is, as leaders, you can create the system, the states where all people feel safe, where they feel safe. And when, you know, I've introduced the kind of concept of brain science. So when you feel a sense of safety, you are able to regulate. When you're able to regulate, you're able to relate. When you're able to relate, you're able to reason. So creating safety in your organization, physically, emotionally, socially, mentally safe, when you feel that you have an importance to other people. So then there's also, how can you create the conditions for people to feel significant? And that is that they feel valued and valuable, that they have a sense of belonging and connection. And lastly, the next bullet point is, can you create situations in your relationships, in the environment you can control, where people feel situated? And that is that they have clear direction and a sense of purpose. This is the work, as I said, of Dr. Stephen de Groot, who with BriviaConsulting.com. So what are kids going to learn? I've had lots of conversations with mums and dads and others about this time when parents are now being asked to be teachers. Well, I think we need to shift the dialogue from parents as teachers or homeschoolers to thinking about parents as supporters of learning. And the most important thing about this that the kids are going to remember is, how did I feel during this COVID that time? And this is from Maya Angelou, and she says, I've learned that people forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So think about that. How you make people feel is what's going to be remembered. That's the advice I suggest that you give to your parents and your other teachers. So the next slide is about how can they, answering the question, how can we ensure when the crisis is over that we just don't go back to the same way of operating? You know, we've known for so very, very long that in times of crisis is when the opportunity for change is greatest. So Karanga and other organizations and myself are so very, very hopeful that we will have learnings through this period of time that are going to change the way business is done fundamentally in education. One of the key learnings that I hope people have is that people will stop thinking about, well, let's do academic excellence and narrow the gap and increase the graduation rates and do our math better. And then, oh, on the side, we'll do well-being. I think, as Dr. Adler has said, we need to be thinking about academic and well-being together as the double strands of the DNA. And what connects those strands is relationship. It's relationship that is absolutely at the heart of the matter. But what's going to be the reality? The next slide shows us that before the COVID crisis, in Ontario, the province where I am, a survey that was done in almost half of Ontario's youth missed school because of anxiety at some point in time. We have seen a steady increase in anxiety, in suicidal ideation, in visits to emergency rooms, and I'm sure it's the same all across the world. Well, my big worry as a child psychiatrist is that we're going to see even more kids with anxiety. They are in homes where parents are very anxious about, am I going to be able to make the rent or my mortgage payments? How am I going to go out and get the shopping I'm supposed to do if I'm self-isolated? So I predict, unfortunately, that we are going to see an increase. Now, what we already know is that we cannot treat ourselves out of this. We will never have enough child psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, therapists. We'll never have enough when the numbers are so high. So what we need to be thinking, and we absolutely need for leadership, is to be thinking about how it takes the village to raise the child, that we need to be thinking about the individual child and support to the family. The family needs the support of the residential community. We really have to think in this big time ecological model. At the heart of the change that I hope that we see is that focus, and the next slide, which is on the focus of a sense of belonging. When we have that sense of belonging, when we feel safe, significant, and situated, then we absolutely can learn. I worry as a child psychiatrist that we have not spent nearly enough time thinking about, do kids feel that they belong here? As they return to school, as teachers return to school, focusing on that sense of belonging, I matter, what I bring to the situation counts. So the other huge thing I hope for is in the next slide, and that is that we'll finally wake up and realize that you don't learn if your limbic system is on overdrive, that what we so deeply need is our people, our kids, our staff, to have a solid social and emotional competency. So this is from the National Commission on SEL that Mark no doubt was involved in. And it says, we know that we learn best when adults know us, when they make us feel safe, hold us responsible for our learning. So, you know, what is at the heart of this? Next slide, and my last slide, I just have some additional resources to talk about, is relationship, relationship, relationship. As you think of leaders in education, recognizing that relationships are the active ingredient in the environment. And relationship doesn't mean, oh, just I'm going to be nice to people. The Search Institute has some wonderful resources that talks about developmental relationship framework. So you express care, show that I matter to you. You challenge growth, push me to get better. You provide support, help me complete tasks and achieve goals. Share power. Share power. Treat me with respect and give me a say, and expand possibilities. Engage the world to change the world. Connect me with people and places that broaden my world. So I hope here I've given you a number of things to think about, to think about your own well-being, as well as to think about the well-being of those who you are in a leadership position to lead in these challenging times. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jean. It's been a real treat to have you with us this morning, and you've given us a lot to think about. You've given us a lot of evidence, and you've given us some real concrete examples of why we need to continue to do the work that we're doing and to keep continuing down this pathway of ensuring that every child has access to social and emotional learning. You've given us data, you've given us the reasons why. Can I ask everybody in our audience to continue to write some questions down, to continue to think about some things that are challenging you, to maybe write some questions for us to consider. At the end of Mark's session, we'll have a question and answer time to ask Jean and Mark some questions. So feel free to do that while we move into our next session. So thank you very much, Jean. You've given us plenty to ponder on as we move into Mark's session. I'd like to welcome Mark Brackett with us now this morning. Mark is the founding director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor in the Child Study Center at Yale University. His research focuses on the role of emotional intelligence in learning, decision-making, creativity, relationships, health and performance. Mark is the lead developer of Ruler, a pre-K to high school evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that has been adopted by over 2,000 schools across the globe. He is also on the board of directors of SEL and the author of Permission to Feel, and he'll spend some time with us this morning sharing some of the practical examples of how to bring into practice some of the discussions that Jean has been having with us this morning. So we welcome you warmly, Mark. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. Mark is also on our steering committee for the Karanga Board of Trustees board as well. So thank you very much. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Can you hear me okay? I'm assuming so. All right. So welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Brackett, and you've heard about my background. So I think I'm just going to jump in. I titled my presentation Permission to Feel. It's the title of my new book, but it's also at the heart of really what I want everyone to think about today. And I do have to apologize up front. Since we are all practicing what we need to practice in terms of physical distance, I have not gotten a haircut, and I think my hair is about to touch the ceiling of my house. So I need the permission to express my feelings through my hair today. Joking aside, what I'd love for you to do is, if you have anything you'd like to share publicly about Jean's or my presentation, please use all that social media that we all like to do. So for some reason, I am not able to move my slides forward. Oh, there we go. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna go back. Okay, so welcome again, everybody. And I'm gonna jump right into my first slide, which is a tool that we have developed at our center called the Mood Meter. I don't have time to go through the entire tool today, but what I'd love for you to do is just take a moment and pause. All of you are likely at home. You've woken up this morning, you've had a routine potentially, taking a break to listen to this webinar. How are you feeling? Are you in the yellow, feeling bright energy and feeling optimistic and hopeful and eager and excited? Are you in the green, feeling calm and content or tranquil? Or maybe you're in the red and the blue. You're feeling a little activated and unpleasant. Maybe you're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed or even anxious. Or potentially you're feeling a little down in the dumps or lonely or sad. Just take a moment and think about, how are you feeling? And then I'm going to ask you to think about the strategy that you're going to use to help you get through this webinar. If you're feeling excited, how might you maintain that excitement? If you're feeling calm, is that the right feeling, or do you need a little more energy? Are you in the red and blue and need a strategy to help you be more comfortable in that place or potentially shift over? And the reason why I ask you about the strategy is because from the perspective of the theory of emotional intelligence, it's how we use our emotions. And I want to start off by saying there's no such thing as a bad feeling, right? Anxiety is a real feeling that many of us are experiencing these days, or sadness or despair even. We're not going to judge our feelings. We're just going to allow them to be and then become scientists around them and see what can we do to support us in using those feelings to promote our health and well-being. Many years ago, I had the opportunity to do a study just a couple of years ago with about 6,000 educators across the United States. And what we found was the number one feeling that our educators were experiencing was frustration. And so I had the privilege just 2 weeks ago to launch a second study. I was doing a webinar for the organization Castle that I'm on the board of. And in order to sign up, we asked about 5,000 teachers, educators, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling right now? And as you can see, the feeling states are a little different. Whoops. The number one emotion by an educator, at least this is actually globally, was anxiety. So we've seen that before the COVID-19 crisis, we had teachers feeling quite a bit of unpleasant feelings. They were mostly frustration. That seems to have moved now to that red feeling of anxiety, uncertainty, overwhelmed. And so when you think about our feeling states, what you see is that we are, just having a little clicker problem here. We're a little bit emotionally out of balance. You know, we're experiencing a lot of those red and blue feelings. And the question is not how do we get rid of the red and the blue and get to the yellow and green, but rather how do we experience more yellow and green at the same time? And so what I'm arguing is that we can't be in the yellow and green all the time. Like right now, it's really hard for me personally to be in the yellow. It's also hard for me to be in the green sometimes. I try as best as I can. I am in red and blue quite a bit. And I need to figure out how to manage those feelings, accept those feelings, but also just try a little bit to experience some pleasant emotions. So we find that when we ask people, you know, how are you dealing with your feelings these days? This is from the survey of teachers right now. We're not seeing some of the most helpful strategies: screaming, whine, avoidance, over ruminating, obsessive cleaning. Somebody said to me, well, that's a good strategy. It is to an extent, but if you're, you know, going nuts with your cleaning, you know, probably not the best strategy. And one of the things that I'm very interested in is what we call healthy emotion regulation, which is going to be the primary focus of my presentation today. And the reason why I care about healthy emotion regulation is that those unhelpful strategies that I just shared with you, you know, think about them. They require a little bit of effort, not much effort. They happen mostly outside of our awareness. We just automatically pick up that glass of wine or yell and scream. I don't know about you, but I've been living home with my partner and my mother-in-law for the last 3 weeks, and this is a whole new world. And I'm taking my breaths and I'm thinking positive thoughts, and then I say something mean or cruel, or they say something like, give me feedback about a meal that I created that I didn't ask for. So I, you know, in the moment I'm like screaming, unfortunately, at times, even as the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. And then of course I regret it later on, and it's tough, but we're all in this together and we're trying to work through it. Unfortunately, I think I learned a lot of those strategies from my lovely parents, like many of us have, right? Growing up in families with adults who didn't have an emotion education. Unfortunately, the impact of these unhelpful strategies is not so great, from not solving the problem to negatively impacting our relationships, to derailing us from our goals, to decreasing our health and well-being. And they often are really hard habits to break. So there are some steps that we take at our center to help for lasting effects. And if I had 3 hours with you, I'd love to unpack all of these. What I'd like to assert is that we need to teach people the science of emotion and emotional intelligence. We need to understand that social and emotional learning is a set of hard skills. They're not soft skills. We need to move beyond the goal that happiness is the answer, right? We need to focus more on prevention, so there's less need for intervention. Think about even with the COVID-19 crisis, if we were more prevention focused, maybe at least our country here in the United States wouldn't be in this predicament. If we would have taken precautions and looked at the data and thought about this, we wouldn't be trying to fix things later on. Have greater balance in our curriculum. Think about it. How much time is spent in our schools teaching emotion regulation skills? Obviously, we need to bring families into the picture. We really need to move on to quick fix. You know, now all of a sudden we're focused so much on well-being, genes, in my presentation. But well-being is always important. It's not that now we have to do it. It's just that now, you know, when our lives have been turned upside down, everybody's striving for it. But this is something we should be thinking about all the time. And of course, we need to overhaul outdated and often harmful policies. So with that said, the vision of the Center for Emotional Intelligence is to use the power of emotions to create a healthier and more equitable, innovative, and compassionate society. And Ruler is the approach that I've had the privilege of leading for the last 20 years. And our goal is to live those steps that I just mentioned, to move from piecemeals to more systemic models. And today I'm just going to share a little bit about this work. I think importantly, the strategy for any work in well-being or social and emotional learning has to be all-inclusive. We have to have adults that are prepared and ready to do this work. We have to have school-wide tools from preschool to high school, including outside of school time. We need supports, meaning lots of resources, and we also need to be able to monitor and evaluate, is this working? We've learned over the years that everybody's got to be involved. We can't just have a well-being curriculum for our kindergartners or our 8th graders. We've got to have leaders and teachers and students and families all with the same language. There are 4 aims that I want you to think about today. 1, what is your mindset about feelings? 2, how deep is your practice in developing these skills? 3, what is the culture and climate of your organization like? And 4th, have you infused these principles into what we would call the pedagogy, practices, and school-wide policies of your school? Because what we learned from research is that when you do those 4 things, you get the best outcomes. Few things. 1, we know that emotions matter, and they matter for beyond our health and well-being. How we feel affects our attentional capacity, as Jean shared with you. It affects our quality of decisions. Certainly it affects our relationships. Think about it. Emotions are signals to approach or avoid. People who feel strong, unpleasant feelings that don't necessarily want to approach the world. And when we see people expressing a lot of negativity, we don't want to approach them. And then we heard in terms of the link between emotions and physical and mental health, right? How our brain processes information affects our immune system. It affects the neurochemicals that are released, which in turn affects our physical and mental health. And finally, it affects our performance. Think about it. How we deal with our feelings affects our creativity. As we say in our center, emotions are the fuel of creativity, and the skills of emotional intelligence are what help us to make that creativity a reality. So I have a question for you. Are you an emotion scientist or are you an emotion judge? Think about it. Are you open to all emotions? Are you curious? Are you reflective? Do you get specific when you label your feelings? Or are you an emotion judge who views emotions as kind of error? Some of my colleagues here at my university, think of what we do as soft science. They're like, we're biologists, we're neuroscientists, this emotion stuff is fluffy. Of course, these are people who have children who don't like them and have been divorced 6 times, but no judgment. Oops, sorry. So the emotion judge is critical, closed, ignores emotions, makes attributions. They say things like, why are you so anxious? Like, wait a minute. Why are you telling me I'm anxious? You didn't even ask me. Maybe I'm not even anxious. Maybe I'm feeling down or overwhelmed. And has a fixed mindset, meaning that when that person fails at regulating, they don't really work towards growing. They just say, this is who I am. Get over it. We're going to try to help you have that growth mindset around your emotion skills today. Which leads us to the actual skills of emotional intelligence. There are 5. We call them the ruler skills. Recognizing, understanding, and labeling emotions. Those are the 3 skills that help us be aware of what we're feeling and what other people are feeling. They help build what we'll call emotional awareness. That's picking up on the cues in face, body, and voice. It's knowing why we have our feelings, like being able to disentangle what makes us angry versus annoyed versus anxious or overwhelmed. It's having the language to say, you know what, I'm not feeling anxious, I'm feeling just nervous, or I'm not sad, I'm disappointed. And then we have to express and regulate those feelings. What I say in my book is that we have to be given the permission when we're children to express those feelings. We may express them, but then what happens is we get punished for them, or we get yelled at for having them, or we get told to suck it up or get over it. That's not giving us permission to feel, that's giving us permission to express, or suppress, I should say. And so we also need strategies to regulate, as I've said, and I want to focus on that for my last few minutes with all of you. What is healthy emotion regulation? Emotion regulation has to do with the thoughts, so how we think, has to do with the things that we do to prevent unwanted emotions, to reduce the difficult ones, to initiate ones that we want to experience, to maintain the ones that we're feeling that may be pleasant or that are going to help us achieve a goal, and to enhance certain emotions. From our center's perspective, the goal of emotion regulation is to promote our well-being, build positive relationships, make sound decisions, and attain goals. That's healthy emotion regulation. Unhealthy emotion regulation are the strategies that we all know too well that derail us from our goals, that get us in trouble, that make our lives difficult. So when it comes to stress, as you learned from Jean, right, we know that we experience stress when we perceive the world as being unpredictable, uncontrollable, and sustained, meaning that, can't predict if I'm going to get this or if other people are going to get it. I don't have control over it, and it's going to last forever, which is like when you have a toothache. Currently, many of our educators and leaders feel this chronic stress, and we know that it makes our brain on that alert mode, danger mode, right? Coupled with not getting enough sleep and not exercising and not eating healthy, oftentimes our worst selves come out, right? You saw in the news, we spray people, we gargle with Clorox, we panic buy toilet paper, we say mean or hurtful things. We also have catastrophic thinking, right? Our brains lie to us. It's like when I'm flying, my brain lies to me all the time. Like when this plane starts shaking from turbulence, I'm like, oh my God, it's over. And then I interviewed my cousin who was a pilot, and he said, Mark, did you know that there's never been a crash because of turbulence? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So every time I get on a plane now, I have information, I have accurate data that can challenge my negative thoughts. Wow, all of a sudden, turbulence has a different meaning. So how do we apply that right now? Well, there are so many strategies, and I had the privilege of doing a webinar on this that you can see. It's called Castle Cares on healthy emotion regulation. And there are physiological regulation with mindful breathing, there's self-care, there's managing our relationships, there is managing our thoughts, and as Jean said, manage your life smartly, have those routines, doing things you enjoy, and then, you know what, we're gonna fail, as I've done about 100 times in the last 2 weeks. I apologize, I ask for forgiveness. I've decided my new strategy is to teach my family about the power of forgiveness. I'll let you know how that goes the next time we're together. So healthy relationships, a few things I want to just mention about that. One, in our schools, we find that most kids, 2/3 of them, say they don't have a strong relationship with their teachers. Now that we're living in this virtual world, how can we rectify that? What can we do differently? Just the mere presence of a caring adult makes a difference. So know that. Just having that facial expression that says, I am here for you, is critically important to kids. And let's move beyond just traditional empathy, which is like helping people manage their misfortunes. And let's think about the ways that we can have positive empathy, where we can build on and bolster an individual's well-being by noticing the things that are going well and pointing them out. I want to bring my session to a close by also talking about positive self-talk. So many of us are programmed to have negative self-talk from our childhoods. I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, I'm too short, I'm too tall. I'm a worrier and that's never going to go away. I'm too feminine, I'm too masculine, I'm too dark, I'm too light. The list goes on. We know that that never is helpful. So what I'm going to challenge all of you to do is to catch your catastrophic, your negative thinking, and try your best to pause and breathe. Instead of saying, I'm going to lose it, to Mark, be the feelings master. You can get through this. By distancing myself and referring to myself in a third person, I can have that empathy for myself in that conversation. Instead of saying, I'm never going to make it being at home for so long. Mark, this is an opportunity to learn and grow closer. Remember, as Eckhart Tolle has taught us, you can't cope with the future. The last thing I want to share is that you got to do things you enjoy too, and it's hard. We have to give ourselves the permission to do things that we enjoy. Take that walk, do that little game that you haven't played, paint that little painting, do that journaling, whatever it might be. And this, you get these slides so you can learn from these and share other things that you're doing, just to give yourself some time to have fun. So a few final points. 1, may I ask all of you to give yourself and others the permission to feel all of these emotions. Remember, emotion regulation isn't about not feeling. It's about accepting those feelings and using them wisely. Strive to be that emotion scientist, not the emotion judge. Remember, we're all in this together, right? Physical distance, as we've heard, does not mean psychological distance. And be that Uncle Marvin for someone. What I mean by that is I was blessed in life to have an uncle who was that caring, loving adult, that compassionate emotion scientist who was the listener, who wasn't telling me to get over my anxiety as a kid and my bullying fears. He was there for me. He offered himself to me in the most fullest, complete way. Ask yourself, who has that person been for you? If you haven't had that person, maybe you can sublimate that and be that person for someone else. Appreciate that developing emotion regulation skills is hard. It's sometimes harder than learning traditional skills. Be the role model. If you fail, be open to apologizing, forgiving and repairing, and seeking professional help if necessary. We're not going to judge. We need to get all the support we need to enjoy our lives. And finally, can I ask all of you during these difficult times, just don't give up on yourselves. Don't give up on other people, right? We need each other during these times. Your health and your children's health depend on it. And on that note, I cannot believe I got through this presentation so quickly. I haven't talked so fast in my entire life. I just want to thank you for your time. And I want to say my final quote, which is, between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. It's one of my favorite quotes from Viktor Frankl. And just want to ask you to fill that space with joy, fill that space with helpful strategies. And I'll argue that it's our moral obligation to help develop these skills in our children, which means that it's our moral obligation to be the adult role models for them. And on that note, thank you so much. And my information, contact information, is on the left. And I'm going to turn it back to our host, Joanne.
Thank you so much, Mark. I don't think I've had such a wonderful hour in the last few weeks as I've had today with you guys all together. I think one of the things that just fascinates me is that both you and Jean have given us permission to just be, and to remember that we are human and that we are all in this together, and that this is unprecedented, that we haven't been through anything like this before. And I think what you've given us all is the sense of that it's actually okay to learn how to live through this together, and that we are all experiencing something that is completely new, and that we've got time to figure this out together, and that if we race through this, we're not going to take the learning that we can learn from it. So this is an opportunity just to say a really big thank you to you both for sharing your absolute expert wisdom with us, and your humanity, your humility, and your knowledge has just been really, really valuable for us all. And I'd just like to just say thank you from the bottom of my heart, and from the whole team, from Karanga, from Knowledge Hook, from Salzburg Global. And then just to give an opportunity for our audience to ask a few questions. Some of the questions that I've just been observing just to the side in the question and answer box have just been around a couple of themes. One of them is that there's a sense of fear that if we stop giving students academic and focus sort of solely on social and emotional, are we letting them down? Are we leaving them behind? Are we giving them a sense of that we're not doing the right things for them? So I think through both of your sessions, you've allayed that fear, but just to give us one last sense of, are we okay if we let go of that sense of trying to make sure that they're focusing on the academic while we're getting through this pandemic? One of the questions is that if we focus on this sort of concept of deeper learning or that learning of, working together, are we doing the right thing? And is it okay to focus on that through this time of pandemic? Your thoughts, either Jean or Mark?
So I can begin if that's okay. So I think first of all we need to be thinking about each individual child. There isn't a pat answer. for this. But I think what's very important is that when we're thinking about the role of parents, we think about them as supporters of learning. When we're thinking about teachers, I think we need to be shifting away from what I've called stuffing the duck or filling the bucket, and be thinking more about igniting the flame of learning. So it's not that you're leaving academics behind per se, but can you think of creative ways in the routines that kids are being engaged in where you can excite their engagement with learning? What are they doing? How are they spending their time? What is their routine? So that thought of not stuffing everything into the kid in terms of content, but still helping them learn, move forward, explore their environment, and let them play, because that's how so many kids learn.
Thank you, Jean. That's a really great answer. And Mark, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I would say this is, we know that this pandemic will be over, and it's not going to be a 5-year, the repercussions for certain things, may last long, but, the disruption to our education system, is a short-term experience. And so I think if we go absolutely crazy just trying to figure out all the technologies and how to, make sure that we stick to our, reading and writing, which is important, obviously, that's a mistake. That right now we should use this as an opportunity to help children think creatively, to help children understand real world problems. And we can use character analyses. We can teach children through character analysis about resilience and about healthy emotion regulation. So I would use this as an opportunity to teach the skills that children need to support them in getting through these difficult times.
That's great.
Thanks, Mark. I think that's one of the things that I'm really conscious of, is this is a time for connection. This is a chance for us to connect as human beings, to connect with our families, to have that time to do things together. And I think that's one of the things that you both have spoken about, is that really that time to really enjoy each other and to do things together. And that can be academic, that can be social and emotional learning. Another question that one of our participants has asked is that, how do we support administrators and teachers who do connect with their students and face a myriad of responses that may cause trauma for the actual staff? How do we support our staff when they're sort of being exposed to things they may never have had actual exposure to?
Yeah, so I can start with that one. I think it's an example of the tremendous ability of kids to come to school and keep what happens outside of school so very, very far removed. And one of the things that I'm most concerned about are these young little ones, these children and youth who are in challenging situations. I would say, so what have I learned as a child psychiatrist? That there are things that I can control and things that I can't control. And so I love that last phrase that you had there, Mark, about from Viktor Frankl. The desire to find it, fix it, the F2 behaviors is very high in many of us. And the reality is we're not going to be able to find it and fix it, the solution for some of these children. So what's important is that we're a sounding board. We listen to them. And also we see, well, what are the community resources? Be hunters, be detectives, to see what might be there that I can make recommendations about. But remember, we can't offer our own calm if we don't feel that calm. So to look after yourself and not take on the responsibility. And then ask yourself the questions about what do I need in this situation? What do I hope for in this situation? What is it that I think I need to be doing, so that you're actually examining your needs, values, goals, and strengths, rather than being overwhelmed by the stories of others.
Yeah, that's lovely, Jean. Thank you for that. What I would add to that is that we know how teachers feel right now, right? We have the data. It's a pretty strong study of over 5,000 teachers. They're anxious, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed, but do we know how they want to feel, right? We have to ask teachers, how do you want to feel right now? And when we find out that they want to feel safe and they want to feel valued and they want to feel connected and supported and whatever they tell us, then the question we have as leaders of our schools and as colleagues is, what do we need to do to support those feelings being more prevalent? And so I urge all schools to ask that question. And it makes you vulnerable because it oftentimes, brings about things that are not present in our schools, but that's okay, right? Find out how people want to feel and ask them what they need in order to have those feelings, and then come together to try to make that a reality.
And I think, Mark, what you've raised is that might be different in each place, and that's okay. And I think one of the biggest things is to actually ask that question and to come up with some solutions that are local, and then in each place it might be slightly different for each community. And I think that's one of the things that we're learning is okay, and that it's not going to necessarily be a standard answer for each place that we're working in, and in each community either.
Can I add, Joanne, just that there's a researcher, Basil Vanderkolk, Bessel, Vander, Kolk. And to Google him, he's doing a series of, he's a trauma expert, developmental trauma expert, and he's got some fabulous suggestions for people in exactly around that question of being traumatized. So it would be really helpful. Basil Vanderkolk.
Great, thank you so much. Mark and Jean, are there any last thoughts you would like to share before we close off for this webinar today? Anything you'd like to just add as a final word for everybody who's out there working with our communities?
My last words are to remember that love builds brains, that it is through connection that we and relationship that we grow, and that's what we remember. And so keep that in mind in your leadership roles, whatever they are. Relationship, and build those connections.
Thank you, Jean. Over to you, Mark.
Well, Jean stole mine, so now I feel, I don't know what I feel. I have to figure that one out. But I will just say, just give yourself the permission to have these feelings, and don't be that judge. Don't have feelings about your feelings. Don't be angry that you're anxious or whatever it might be. Just allow yourself to be. And, when you notice yourself engaging in potentially catastrophic thinking or negative thinking, just take that breath and, ask yourself, what do I do? What do I have control over as opposed to what I don't have control over? And maybe just give yourself the opportunity to shift your thinking so that you can sleep well at night, make good decisions for your family and for your work, and allow this to be an opportunity for you to grow and achieve your goals. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to Eugene. And I would like just to finish with a little analogy. I think of this as another opportunity to consider ourselves as similar to being like redwood trees. They've lasted through the test of time. They've managed through many hundreds of years and years and years. And the reason they do it is not so much the strength of their height, but the fact that they have very, 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 very large networks of roots. And their roots, that their edges of their roots just touch each other very gently, and they hold on to each other in times of trauma and times of challenge. And I think this is a time that we can, as educational leaders, hold on to each other and just touch lightly to remember that we're there for each other, and that we can hold on to each other in these times of challenge and make sure that we can weather the storms together. So it's great, with great heart, I thank you both, Jean and Mark, for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom with us. And I pass it back over to you, Jean, to finish this webinar off for us, and just wish everybody well, and take care of yourselves and look after your family and your friends. Kia kaha to you all.
Wow, thank you so much, Joanne, Jean, and Mark. I think on behalf of all the participants and the senior education leaders that are on this right now, a huge thanks to all of you. We were very privileged to have world-renowned speakers come on and help us at a really challenging time. The good news is that we will be continuing with this. We have another session coming up. It is on May the 4th. And again, it will be focusing on social emotional learning and designing learning for meaning and connection. And one of the things that I heard in comments on the Q&A and read about them is that people are wondering, yes, this is so important right now while we're in school closures and institutional closures, but how do we make sure that we really do things better when we come back into our systems? And one of the ways that we can do that is by continuing these connections. Also, lots of questions on, do we have the opportunity to have this webinar as an on-demand version? And the answer is yes. We will be sending out to all the participants the on-demand version of this, as well as copies of the slide decks. So you will have those to be able to spread the word in your systems. And I couldn't have said it better than Jean. Let's end this. Love builds brains, and we'll continue that work together. Thanks, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you on May the 4th.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.